this Boylston Regional School District Committee and Budget Hearing to order. Please stand for the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Thanks, everybody. A couple things about the budget hearing tonight. If you want to make a public comment, there's a sign-in sheet near the door. Real quick, could I please have a motion to approve the consent agenda tonight?
So moved.
Megan?
Second.
Lori? Any questions? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, that passes. Next up, we have a quick discussion, or not quick discussion, but a discussion with Tracy Nova from MASC. She's going to give us a little update on our interim superintendent search.
Good evening. It's good to be back with you again this evening. And I will echo the not taking too much time because you have other important business before you this evening as well. When we last spoke, you made the decision to essentially do a two-part superintendent process, work on interim for next year with the sort of guidance of the department, and then do a full search for a permanent replacement in the fall. So consider this, first of all, the preview of coming attractions. My plan, you have a regular meeting scheduled for May 13th, by which point you should be moved through this process and so forth. I'll plan to be back with you then to actually give you a fall schedule. By then, the administration will have a little bit better idea of timelines, days, that kind of thing. So for those of you who are looking ahead to that, I plan to be back for that. In the meantime, you each have this handout in front of you. Remember, of course, this is entirely under your purview, so this is a proposal. You should take it as such. Looking at your calendar and looking at sort of what else is going on, really more or less in the universe at this point, if you move ahead with this evening, we would plan to have the position posted on our website and actually give you the information so that you can post it on the district school spring by the end of the week. We probably can do it actually in the next couple of days. Our communications people have already been starting to work on this based on the draft. My proposal then would be that you set a deadline for the interim applications of Friday, April 4th. That gives a good 3 weeks. It doesn't take things too long. Gives a bit of time for things to circulate without that sort of thing. We are going to make it clear, and this is, again, based on really the timeline of what you're trying to do, that applications are going to not be confidential. So usually in a superintendent search, the first round of interviews and so forth is confidential. In this case, because you're looking for an interim position to fill the position for a year, and because you're looking to make sure that this happens well before the end of the year, my recommendation would you do that. You can, as long as you sort of say up front, applications are public, that's fine. What that means is that they then can go directly to you as the committee, and I would share them with you that evening. You get them electronically as PDFs. You have access to a Dropbox folder. That's how we collect it. We would collate it all for you. And then you have a regular meeting scheduled that following Tuesday, April 8th. If during that regular meeting, you review the applications, again, they're public, we do it in public session, decide essentially who you then would want to bring in for interviews. You then have a following week. Now, you don't have any meetings scheduled that week. It is the week before April vacation. But if you, during that following week, scheduled an evening to have interviews, you could bring people in for public interviews, make your selection that evening, and have a decision then made before everybody goes on April break. And that also then gives you the advantage of having made the decision before you do things like move into town meetings in May, which is also a nice thing. So I was partly focusing on April intentionally because that, I wouldn't say it's a lull in the budget process. I'd never dare say that with your director of finance at the table. But from a school committee perspective, you've got one section done, and it's before you move on to the other section. The other thing is that interviews, because they're conducted in public session, you can't internally deliberate your interview questions. So my suggestion to you, again, without trying to give you a whole bunch of additional meetings, would be that I work with Mike to collect what topics you'd want to make sure were covered. And then we sort of put together an interview to make sure that we cover everything you think needs to be covered in those interviews, and just have that ready for you for that week before April vacation, so that you have the questions set, you walk into the interview, you know what questions you're asking, you can move ahead. Again, that's a proposal, you can do it as you will. Then the next section, I'm not gonna read it aloud to you, is actually what we would then post. And so what we would do is, I know that you've seen our formal, full-time, permanent sorts of brochures. This one doesn't have the pretty pictures and so forth because you're going for an interim, but it would have some of the same sections, right? So the Berlin-Boylston Regional School Committee seeks an experienced administrator who will bring continued stability as the interim superintendent for the 25-26 school year. And then we've got a couple of sentences here that describe the successful candidate will have a professional record of building and sustaining relationships with district and municipal officials. The committee seeks an individual to provide strong financial oversight, curriculum alignment, and completion of the district strategic plan. As you're probably gathering, this is based on what I've been gathering from attending some of your meetings and sort of hearing in your discussions. So that's what that's intended to do. Again, that paragraph is entirely subject to your edit, deliberation, what have you. The next section is a pretty standard. You need someone who's licensed and someone who's experienced. And then the next page, are yours two-sided? They're supposed to be two-sided. Oh, that's not good. Actually has a description of the two communities. Oof, that's not there. They didn't finish two-sided. Okay.
That's in the electronic version.
Beg pardon?
It's in the electronic version.
It's in the electronic version. Do you all have it in front of you? Okay, and I don't, but there you go. So the two things that it has is it does have a salary range, which is based on both the region and what you have budgeted for superintendent salaries over the last couple of years. We are moving towards being required to post that in position descriptions under new state law, so we're trying to get in the habit of doing that. And then it does have a description, which I worked with administration on, which I believe is coming from some of the work that you're doing on your strategic plan. Free to edit that as well. I would never tell someone else how to describe their community. Does have the information in terms of how many schools you have, what the enrollment is, and what your FY25 budget is. So that, Mr. Chair, is what I have for you. I'm happy to take any questions, and also this is for you to decide what to do with.
All right, does anyone have any questions, Tracy? So should we vote to stick with the schedule, or if we just?
The things that would be useful for you to vote is, in particular, if you can vote the position description, if people are good with that. And then yes, if you could at least affirm the timeline. We would actually put the timeline on the position description as well, just so that people know when our applications due, when are you doing interviews.
Do I have a motion to accept the position posting as presented by Tracy?
So moved.
Megan?
Second.
Jess? Was that Jess?
Yep.
All right. Anyone have a question about this discussion?
I'm concerned about it being the week before break, how realistic that is. So I don't know if have another meeting before the 14th, I don't know.
You're talking about the April break?
Yeah. So the week of the 14th, doing the interviews that week.
What's the problem? That's a school week, yeah? Is there a particular concern, or?
No, it seems like a very tight window. So hypothetically, we would tell applicants on the 8th that they're going to be interviewed sometime during the week of the 14th.
We would, yes. We would actually put this, you'll see this again, we do this in the fall too, but we actually put this right on the application. And in my experience, applicants then tend to understand that they're going to need to be available that following week.
The last thing we want is applicants asking HR, when's my interview? When's my interview?
Right.
Why are they taking my
Well, so
resume?
just so that you know, what will also go on this, we always put as a tagline, do not contact the school committee. If you have any questions, they'll contact me.
Yeah.
Which is partly just so that you don't get driven batty questions and emails. But yes, no, understanding and appreciating your point. It's a tighter timeline than we would run for a permanent position. We usually would post for something more like 4 or 5 weeks for a permanent position. I'm always reluctant to, so you have a regular meeting on the 8th. If you took 2 weeks then at that point, I'm sort of reading into what you're saying. So you then end up with sort of this 2-week lag before you have, right? Vacations are always awkward in scheduling. That's absolutely true. One of the advantages you'll have in the fall actually is there's fewer breaks. But yeah, the February and April vacations definitely are part of it.
So I mean that, as a Christian, it's Holy Week, so I would like to avoid Thursday and obviously Friday
Yes.
before break. So, I just quickly looked at the calendar and what that week means. So, I think it would be good for us to kind of nail down the date maybe now that we all can agree on before we say yeah.
And honestly, if you did, we could put that right in the application.
What about the 15th? That's the Tuesday. Want to do that? All right. Jeff, you want to amend it then?
Yes, I would like to make a motion to amend the motion to set the interviews for April 15th evening, 5 p.m. like we usually.
We need a second for that.
Second.
Okay. Anybody want to discuss that? All right, all in favor of the amendment?
Aye.
Anyone against? All right, the amendment passes, so now we're on to the original motion of the job posting with the interview date from the 15th of April. Any further discussion? All right, all in favor of that?
Aye.
Anyone against? All right, that motion passes as well. Thank you, Tracy. I think we have our schedule set for the superintendent.
Excellent. So if those of you who are, the committee members could think over the next bit of time, what topics you want to cover in an interview. Feel free to shoot me an email at any point and I'll work with Mike on that. All right, excellent.
Thank you.
One thing I already said the same. Thank you.
Yeah, just watch your step.
All right. Before we get to the budget hearing, we do have one more piece of business that came up. So several of us met last for the Thursday or Friday, February 28th at the Honto with several members of DCR, along with Senator Kennedy and Representative Phil Coyne, some members from their teams, and other town officials to discuss or look at the process of expanding parking here at the Honto. And I want to thank specifically Boylston Select and Matt Meekum. He sort of arranged all this and has been driving this part at least recently about this. So thank you, Matt. So we talked about where we might put a parking lot if we were able to expand it, what issues that brings up, a lot of issues around water runoff because of the reservoir and everything, so PCR is involved. They gave us a good indication of what they, not necessarily what they might approve or not approve, but the process of going through an application to actually start talking about something. So I think what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a subcommittee to study this a little bit more. So we're going to have the Tohoto Parking Subcommittee. It's going to consist of Megan Grill, myself, and Matt Meekum. Matt will be the designated point person to speak with DCR about this. The subcommittee will report back to the full school committee on a quarterly basis, whether that's in person or through a written report. The first step is going to be, as DCR requested, to submit a sketch to them so they can have an idea of what we're talking about. And then once they have that, they can sort of point us in the right direction for which application process to go through. There's different application processes for different types of variances that we might need depending on what we're actually going to build. This is only a first step. There's no commitment here to anything. This is just exploring what our options might be. So that is going to be a new subcommittee for the school committee, and we're going to see what comes of that. Now, I do have actually, does anybody have a question about parking?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've had experience with the DCR historically, and since I'm no longer on the negotiation subcommittee, I would like to offer my services as well for that subcommittee.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? All right. So before we get into the budget hearing, Alan Aaron, I'm going to present something. I do have a few things I'd like to say, and I wrote them down so that I don't miss anything and mess anything up. But first, I want to thank the administration and this budget subcommittee who have worked incredibly hard to come up with this budget. They've been in constant communication with both towns about the budget. I want to thank Aaron specifically and Dan before him for coming into an incredibly difficult situation and owning everything that they found. Al, you built a great, competent team from the ground up. Nobody actually in the central office, as far as I'm aware of, who's working today within the books of the financial school, was actually here before September. I don't think that's the case. So I can't imagine coming into this type of situation with zero historical knowledge left over. It'd be incredibly difficult for anyone to realize the scale of the issues that they face. Even being an accountant, I can't imagine or begin to imagine what they might be facing and trying to sort all that out. So thank you, Alan and Aaron, for still being here today. This is pretty helpful to have you guys here at the budget hearing. Thank you very much. Especially I want to thank Megan for being part of the budget subcommittee meeting. I don't think anyone has a deeper grasp on the issues in the budget than Megan does, and she's worked harder than anyone probably realizes to help them get a grasp on this. So thank you, everybody. So before we begin, I feel the need to provide some ground rules for our discussion tonight, as well as clarify something. First of all, there's a sign-up sheet if you'd like to make a public comment, just so we can keep everything in order and keep it moving. It's at the door if you'd like to sign up for that. There's also a QR code at the door and around the auditorium here. If you'd like to scan that, you get an electronic version of this presentation directly on your device. So if you want to follow along there, feel free to watch on one of the screens. But I do have to clarify something that I keep hearing out in the community, this false idea around the idea that taxpayers in one town are paying expenses or specifically to the elementary school of another town. It's been mentioned several times. Berlin Finance Committee in February that Alan and Aaron went to, this was brought up. Aaron does have some certain aspects of the regional agreement in his presentation, how that dictates certain costs be allocated to both towns. We can discuss how this happens, how one town share, Berlin share, might be growing based on the student population and how that's growing faster than Boylston. Boylston still being a larger town student population-wise, but the growth in these towns is different. We have the data from NESDAQ to support that. We have our enrollment data to support that, the DESI data to support that. But I want to be very clear that no one on the school committee, the budget that we have, believes that any town's taxpayer dollars can be used to pay the other town's elementary school costs or any costs outside of what the regional district, the regional agreement specifies. Unless I'm wrong, does anybody on the committee feel that we can do that? No. Okay, so I want to clear that up. I've asked to speak to them individually, but haven't had a response yet on that. So we'll clear that up. Another thing I want to clear up is that there are some district-wide costs that get allocated to both towns. District-wide costs being things like the central office, salaries for Aaron and the rest of their team there. Aaron's presentation is going to detail the formula, but essentially it goes based on student population, and there are slightly different formulas using different student counts depending on the area of the budget that we're discussing. Aaron will go into more detail about this, but for example, district costs might be split a quarter to BES, a quarter to BMS, and 50% to Tohoto. It's going to look like these costs are a bigger percentage of, let's say, the BMS budget than they are in the BES budget because of the different sizes of the schools, the different sizes of the budget, but the equal dollar amounts being allocated there. That's based on historical practices. We know that Berlin's student population is growing. It's grown faster than Boylston's population recently. That doesn't mean it won't change in the future. It ebbs and flows. Boylston is still larger than Berlin, but as a percentage of the Tohoto costs, at least, Berlin may be picking up a larger piece in some years than in other years. So I want to make sure that we're clear on that. It changes every year. If we go down next year, if we go down as easily as if we go up. Also in the regional agreement, the capital costs are allocated using a slightly different formula than the operating costs. So when it comes to Tohoto, there's a different impact to Berlin and Boylston than there is with the operating costs there. So capital is allocated using a formula that uses a 4-year average of student population versus operating costs allocated using a 5-year allocation. So each of these use a different method to count students as well, whereas in the capital formula, it includes something called the Tohoto enrollment percentage, which is only students enrolled in the district, in addition to a ratio of the foundation enrollment, which is another count that DESI has on their website. The operating budget just uses foundation enrollment, so it doesn't use a ratio using any other type of student count. So the foundation enrollment might include students that don't necessarily attend the school, but that the district is still responsible for, or financially responsible for paying. It makes it really interesting when it comes to the debt at Tohoto. This is something I learned, well, I guess we should have realized this, but only just realized it recently. So the bond or the debt for Tohoto is a fixed rate bond. That's what the district pays. But because it is split with the capital allocation to both towns, it effectively creates a variable bond for the towns to pay. Every year it could be one, it could be the other. I don't know if the towns have entered into any sort of hedge or rate swap agreements for that, but that is one reason why you may be seeing things moving differently from year to year, is the way that's allocated. So clear that up, get that out of the way. When the regional agreement was written, those who wrote it, this is what they intended. We're not saying it's right or wrong, it's good or bad. We're simply executing on the way the rules were written. So that's what Aaron's done in his presentation tonight. We're going to talk about what's going to cost to run the schools, but based on a review of our questions we received last year during this presentation, I have asked Aaron to explain some of the less understood concepts of why we get what we do in terms of aid, how that might be allocated to the schools, what it means for circuit breaker and things like that. So I've asked him to do that. We're going to do the budget presentation first. So after the budget presentation, we will invite anyone who would like to make a public comment to do that. The reason I made this decision is to allow you to hear the presentation first. Maybe that might answer some of your questions. Maybe it might create additional questions for you. You'll have the chance to then ask or talk to them after that. We're not going to have a question and answer session. It's not going to be back and forth. You can make a comment, then the school committee is going to discuss. We understand, or I understand, last year was a mess. It was difficult, it was excruciating, painful, comfortable, fun. We understand that, and we're moving past that. We're on to Kansas City. I personally reached out to both towns to see what we could do about fixing things from last year, changing things from last year to the committees in Berlin. That's where the troubles were, of course. I didn't get any response in November, except for maybe a couple, and I'm grateful for those who did speak with me about that. But as we've gone through this year, I've tried to make sure the school districts is doing everything we can to fix the communication issues from last year. I believe we have a great, competent team in place to do just that. So tonight, we're focused on the cost to run these schools next year and not rehashing anything from last year. During public comments, if you want to speak about this budget, the FY26 budget, we're happy to hear what you have to say. We'll stick with our policy, which is posted at the door for 3 minutes each. But we're not going to entertain any gripes or comments or questions or issues relating to last year. We're just not going to do it. It's not on the agenda. We would be in violation of open meeting law if we did. So we're going to do that. All right, I think that's all I had to say. I covered everything. Al, please begin your presentation.
Thank you. So I swear Mike and I haven't really had that many conversations about how we're going to present tonight, and completely in a different vein this year. We're looking to move in a positive direction, and that starts out by seriously thanking everybody. So let me start out by, as well with Mike, thanking him for the work, the extremely hard work over the last several months to create this budget, presentation of the budget that we're going to be presenting you tonight. That includes our principals, our directors, school committee, who we have spent many hours, both as a committee and individually with, as a budget subcommittee as well too. Towns of Boylston, town of Berlin, and certainly Aaron Osborne, our new director of finance and operation. Thank you also to Joe Spizzato and Kyle as well too. Kyle Paquette, who are doing our tech for tonight, for us to be able to have the setting that we have in, having the projection so that everyone can see it, being able to have it live streamed as well too. QR codes for everyone so they can follow along with us and be able to, that constant communication we're trying to get and making sure that we're being the infamous word as transparent as can be and making sure people have the information that's available. So thank you, Joe, and thanks, Kyle. So this is the start of our budget season. We present our budget to the school committee tonight, and then within that range of between next over 45 days, both town meetings will take place in Berlin and Boylston, scheduled for May 5th, where for that our budget will be going to them as well too. In between then, there'll be many conversations that will be happening. We now have meetings scheduled with FinCom and Select Board for both Boylston and Berlin. I think Boylston, we were settled on March 17th. We'll be going, speaking to them, their FinCom meeting. In Berlin, I think it's March 19th as well too. So those are the conversations that we'll start having directly after our presentations tonight. I'm going to shortly turn over this presentation of the budget to Aaron. But before I do, I just want to let people know that in this budget, you'll see some reductions taking place, some FTEs. And I know the school committee and people have reached out to me as well about these. Please know these are very difficult decisions to make. We make them in conjunction with conversations with principals and directors. These are very precise moves And my mindset with these conversations I've had with our principals, our directors about reductions in staff was to redistribute, and I use that word, redistribute the work and positions to others that are working in our district right now. When we're looking at the decision, we always look at the student and we really try to keep that student in the center of our conversation. And how is it going to impact our students? And certainly any decision we make, any reduction, any redistribution of work that we do, is certainly at one point or another is going to impact our students, but we always look at our students and what's the least amount of disruption we're going to have for them. So please know we do that. Also, I want you to know at this time, I still haven't had all of those individual conversations with people because we're still working out this budget. So our professional courtesy, along with, we're still in March, and we still a few months left in our school year, 3 months. I will not be going into the very specifics of these redistributions tonight at this time. I hope that you can appreciate that at this time, that these are still sensitive conversations and still individual conversations that need to be happening with individual people as well too. Last week, my job as instructional leader of the Berlin-Boylston Regional School District, along with our school committee, our directors, our principals, our staff, our paras, is to make sure that we are providing the highest quality of education for our children. That is our number one priority, that and keeping our children safe. And the best way to do that is to have high quality teachers and programs that are a cost to both of our towns. And we understand that and we appreciate it. And we thank you for that as well too. We know that. But please know that providing this type of high quality education is making an investment in our future. So please try to keep, as we're having any of these conversations moving forward, not only at school committee, but in the town of Boylston, the town of Berlin, FinCom, Select Board, that we're keeping our students at the center of these conversations. Many, many times we start talking about adults and budgets and stuff, but we really need to remember that we're talking about our students and making sure that we're providing the best education we can for the fiscal year 26. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Aaron. He'll start his budget presentation. I apologize in advance because I tend to, Aaron and I go back and forth on each other in terms of the presentation, so I'll try my best not to interject too much.
You're not apologizing for me, though.
No.
You might as well get ahead of it.
Yeah.
So, sure. So you have our beginning slide up here. I'd like to take a moment before we start. A month from tonight, I believe, Lisa, correct me if I'm wrong, is the opening of Beetlejuice Jr. here in this auditorium.
Absolutely.
I would encourage everyone listening at home and everyone in the audience to please come. It may be slightly more exciting than this presentation.
And hopefully better attended, right?
Yes, and hopefully better attended. Let's come out for it. Let's have a good time, enjoy what have you. So I think as we go into this, we want to begin by saying a few words, and I think Al alluded to this. Some of the numbers we've provided in the past were level service, right? This is no longer a truly level service budget. We're making some cuts now. We do understand, and you'll particularly see it in the capital lines, that we may not be where the towns want us to be in this moment. We have a lot of capital that's amassed. We understand some of it may have to be put off, and that would be part of those conversations, ideally on the 17th and the 19th. What do things look like, and where can we have some conversations about the things that we give you on what the priorities are. I think Al also alluded that we're really trying to keep these away from direct student-facing roles as much as possible. As we look at this further, the school committee may have to make some hard decisions, hand in hand with the administration, but we'll do the best we can, always to do that. So really quickly, where do we stand? We're going to start with operations, and then we're going to get into capital a little later. Interwoven with this is going to be a little bit of information around how this whole regional agreement works and the assessments, because as Mike alluded to, every single item in this has a different sort of assessment formula. So we'll be getting into a little bit of that at a high level. One of the things you'll notice is even though assessments are going up, the budget is going down. Last year, there was a last-minute effort to reduce assessments, even I think on the floors of town meetings and things like that, in order to make things work. Interestingly, there wasn't necessarily a budget vote in accordance with that. And so, as Desi became involved and was talking to the district, we had to approve a budget. We had a budget in our system, and rather than make sort of draconian cuts mid-year, we made an active decision to sort of hang on to that budget. We asked the school committee to hang on to that budget number, which we know is higher than the assessments would technically warrant. So I think this is a little bit, it's not intended to be smoke and mirrors, but it doesn't entirely tell the whole picture. We'll get into some of that and where we end up being as we go down the way. So breaking down that budget, one of the things we've shared a couple times is we have added a district office. You'll see I use the term district-wide here. In a couple other places I use district office. I apologize, those are the same items, they're analogous terms. I thought I caught all the district-wides and made them district offices, but I think I left them in. In accordance with sort of proper fund accounting, you want to arrange your district, your municipality into cost centers. And individuals have different responsibilities over their cost centers. So principals have responsibility over their school cost centers. The district office cost center would be more or less under Al. We do have individual departments you will see within there. Those are sort of sub-cost centers, and we may in future years look to just call those out a little more. But for now, we're really just trying to identify these district office costs. I want to be really clear that this in no way changes the assessments to the town. You will see the money for the district office costs rolled back into the school budgets in accordance with, as Mike said, past practice, and we'll speak to that a little bit later. Yeah. So as we go to the next slide, the next few slides get into sort of line item-ish budgets, so you can see what each of the major cost areas within each. I think worth noting, following along with the regional agreement at hand, I know some of you are very excited to be doing so. This is consistent with Section 6A, Item 1 of the regional agreement. So as we're going through that section refers to a budget that is to be provided to, I believe, the chair of, I want to say, the finance committee of the towns. This entire presentation should be, and we'll speak to that, compliant with that budget that's being requested via the regional agreement. Different items are in different places on the table in the back of the appendix that gives you those reference points. So I'm not going to dwell on every single school. This is the Burley Memorial budget. These are the major items. We're going to talk a little bit about the major drivers shortly. So I'm not going to dwell on each one of these items. You can see in the notes, though, where we have some factors and some items to think about, as well as some of the offsets. I made sure to note when we're offsetting some costs by school choice and circuit breaker. We'll speak to those later. Those are in the notes section. Boylston Elementary, pretty much ditto, same thing. Offsets, any offsets are in the notes, any interesting comments are in the notes, things worth looking at. Again, I will have a driver's slide in a few minutes to go through. Tohoto, again, same thing. A little bit more here because they have athletics and activities as a separate line item, so they have a few more line items. But this covers the major line items covered in that section of the regional agreement. Again, if you go back to the appendix, it'll direct you to the specific slides that cover each item in that section of the regional agreement. Okay, so next, oh, this was all 3D. Does everyone else have 3D?
No.
Okay. Okay. So this is a visual representation of the budget. I think it's really important to understand how impactful this budget is, and every school budget is to students. What is touching students? Well, that's the instruction section, and that's not called out in this, sorry. There's clearly in the presentation, it's 3D, there's a call out line for both instruction and support. That is the big brownish area you see down at the bottom. Health services, athletics, transportation, custodial keeps this place clean and sanitary, things like that for our students. Technology infrastructure keeps our Wi-Fi running, things like that. Benefits insurance, that's health insurance for our staff, our teachers. Total tuitions, those are out-of-district tuitions, as well as tuitions for school choice students to other districts. So again, directly serving students. School administration, that's your principals, in some cases instructional coordinators, things like that. Even district-wide admin, right? So our payroll person makes sure that every single teacher is paid. That's really important to us, right? If our teachers weren't paid, I know, I'd love them to be here, but I think if they weren't paid, they might not be here, right? I know there were some payroll concerns over the summer. I'm not going to do all of them. We're doing our best to make sure this. So speaking into Mike's comment on how we allocate the district office costs. So the regional agreement doesn't really say anything about how to handle district office costs. It speaks a lot to schools. It doesn't speak to district office specifically. Past practice, and I did reach out to the former business administrator, Bob Connors, and you may remember him, he was here when the regional agreement was begun. He clarified for me that these are the allocations that were used prior and after that regional agreement was put in place and have been used ever since. So that is a 25, 50% split between Berlin Memorial, Boylston Elementary, and Toronto. Toronto, just for clarification, is allocated in accordance with foundation enrollment. So that 50% does get split in accordance with enrollment figures. So the note below just talks about the origins and how they came about. So as we plan this budget, every school district has certain things that are available to offset the budget to reduce costs. These invariably end up reducing the assessments to the parents, right? So the lower the budget, the lower the assessments. So you'll see two sets. There's two sets of offsets that I see in a budget. The first is the direct budget offset, that's what these are. The others are the direct assessment offsets, and we'll talk about those in a minute. So the major categories we have money-wise is school choice, circuit breaker, and then we have an idea grant that funds a number of things. So total direct budget offsets for major items is $2,313,024. I want to be clear, we do have a handful of much smaller items that do also offset the budget. They're just not as significant. So we have a small Title I grant that Sally manages. We do use some of our pre-K tuition account to offset some costs of running that program. But I'm really focused on here are the major items, right? Rather than getting into, there's also E-rate offsets and some other very small items that the budget that don't really matter. So what is school choice? A lot of people have questions on how does this work. So school choice quite simply allows families to enroll their students in school districts that are willing to accept students into districts that they don't live in, that they're not citizens of. So we both receive tuition for school choice students who choose to attend our school district, and we pay school choice tuition to other schools. The Department of Education acts as an intermediary. So we receive and/or we pay $5,000 per student, but there is also a special an increment for students with IEP needs. So if we have students with IEP needs to go to another district. We would fund the cost of those needs. If we take in students who have IEP needs, we would receive the cost of those needs. It's done on a calculation that's standardized by the state of Massachusetts. It's pretty consistent. Janelle staff completes that as we go through the process. Go to the next slide. Circuit breaker, yeah, sorry. So circuit breaker is a program that provides financial assistance to public school districts to offset costs of delivering high-cost special education to students. That's straight from DESE. We get a reimbursement based on the state appropriation. So this is really important. A lot of people think we get either a full amount or a full amount, we've got a set amount. It's really every single year based on state appropriations. I can say it has consistently been around 75% for a while, but there are some other caveats to that. So if you look down at the bottom, towards the bottom, we have to pay the first 4 times what's called foundation enrollment cost, which is about $54,000 up front before we get a cent of reimbursement. Then the dollars beyond that 54% are then reimbursed at that 75%. So you can see the example below. A $100,000 placement would result in a $34,500 reimbursement. So we're often out $100,000 for an out-of-district student, and that's on the low end in terms of relative costs. And we have to wait until the following year to receive $34,000 in reimbursement for that student. So what we have is an ongoing set of reimbursements that carry over from year to year to year to help offset our budget and support those costs. It's not insubstantial, but it doesn't, as you can see, it's nowhere close to meeting the cost or the students. Finally, the last item is our IDEA grant. This is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. This is a federal grant, and it is pretty consistent year to year in terms of our total allocation. It is to some degree based on our district's poverty levels. So much like many years ago, it was based on special education needs. It has since been shifted to be based in a district's poverty, low income profile. So one of the items to note, again, another regional agreement item, we're going to pop these through in italics. So in accordance with the regional agreement, Section 5, subsection E, Article 3B, all grant and other district funds shall be apportioned to school budgets by the district at the district's discretion. So I want to be really clear. We are doing our best to allocate these funds where necessary in an equitable manner. I think you will see if you go to the prior slides, it is divided up pretty equally with a few nuances here and there. Again, going forward, the school committee can have comments about how some of that money is allocated and what we're going to do with it. But it's pretty much that. Getting into our assessment office. So this is the second side to this, stage 2 of the process. So when we get into the actual assessments, there are a couple items that are used to offset the actual assessments themselves. The first is Chapter 70 education aid. Second is Chapter 71. We also use a little bit of Medicaid reimbursement money we receive, and interest income. I will go on to explain each of these. So Chapter 70, this is the sort of standard universal program for state aid from the state of Massachusetts. The state of Massachusetts requires towns to contribute the minimum local contribution based on foundation enrollment and foundation budget. And then they pick up an additional amount to meet their total determination of what that foundation budget would be. That's usually if you've seen minimum net school spending requirements and things like that. It's very similar to that. I won't get into net school spending requirements in this presentation. Again, the regional agreement has something to say about how we allocate this. This is a two-step process. So the intent is for Chapter 70 aid to be apportioned so that changes in Chapter 70 are closely correlated with changes in minimum local contribution. The state changes its minimum local contribution numbers, and then additionally, we allocate those minimum local contribution numbers in accordance with foundation enrollment. So that's where this gets a little bit complicated. So this two-step process means we take all of that MLC money and we adjust it based on the changes in minimum local contributions. So I'm tracking how those changes come about. And invariably, there's a little bit of leftover money. It doesn't always add up perfectly. So that's when you go into step two. So step two, you take that difference and you apportion it by each building's relative foundation enrollment for the district. So two-step formula, I will say in $3.1 million, so make sure, yeah, $3,149,000, there was $37,000 in my step two calculation. So it's a small amount, but there's a little bit of leftover that ends up in that step two calculation. Very exciting. Chapter 71, this is regional transportation reimbursement. Some of you will recall that once upon a time when DESE was pushing schools to regionalize, there was a promise of 100% regional transportation reimbursement. That has never been the case. It has varied in my tenure as a school business official. It has varied anywhere from, I think I've actually seen as low as 7%, but it's been 75 and usually 80 to 90% over the past few years. I want to say the state and various state officials have done a reasonable job of lobbying for school districts and pushing this through legislature so that those percentages are at least reasonable, but not 100%. The other important piece of this is not a 100% reimbursement of all of our transportation costs. It is a reimbursement of transportation of students who live more than 1.5 miles from the school. So every year when we do our end of year report to the state, we do a calculation. So I literally get all the mileages from the bus company or whoever the business administrator is, all the mileages of all the students from the bus company, and we do a calculation, how many of them live 1.5 miles away or more. One of the challenging realities, and a lot of people will say, well, we transport a lot of kids who are less than 1.5 miles. One of the challenges are towns don't have sidewalks, right? Really kind of the expectation is for those most of the transportation requirements is that kids will be walking on sidewalks. It gets really challenging when you don't have sidewalks and you have children walking down streets that are being plowed and have giant mounds of snow in them and things like that, right? So if you're in an environment where you have sidewalks everywhere and those are typically cleared, that provides us with the opportunity to not provide transportation to live short distances. So as per everything else, this has a calculation that uses some acronyms. BORE, BMRE, no jokes on BORE, please. BMRE, BBRE. So really what those are is this gets down to the ratio of students enrolled in each of the schools relative to the entire district. So BORE is Boylston enrollment, right? BORE plus BMRE plus BBRE is the whole district enrollment. So it's the ratio of Boylston students to the whole district. When you follow it down, it's the same thing. I don't imagine. I have sort of the definitions in Appendix 1 if people want them. know what it
If I could just add a little something to that as well too. So I know some of the questions were asked. Parents are seeing buses going by without full buses. Right, one of the things that we need to make sure as a regional district is we're providing every student seat in the bus. So that means mom and dad in the fall might be driving their student to school or for whatever reason, but then in January decide they want their child to start taking the bus because the sports season ended or their after school activities. We always have to make sure with that 1.5 miles that every student has a seat in the bus at all times. So I know that some people talk about why don't we reduce them? But again, we need to make sure that no matter what time of year, that student always will have a seat in that bus.
I'm sorry, so all the folks who are following along the regional agreement, that's very exciting. You will notice I have a little SIC in there. This is confusing language in the regional agreement. So it says regional transportation shall be allocated its share of it. Our assumption, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. Our assumption is that it should read, each school shall be allocated its share of regional transportation based on its relative share, ... So again, this is just another place where we're having to make a judgment call. I think it's a pretty safe judgment call on what the regional agreement means with that sort of challenging language.
And so one of the things we shared with you, and we'll share later on in one of the appendix, is a letter that we just received as of yesterday from the Department of Education and School Committee. I believe you have it sitting there as well too, where they're really stressing us to start revisiting our regional agreement, right? We're a little over 5 years into it right now. Is the opportunity for us to get the town of Boylston together, town of Berlin, school committee, administration, and really start looking at and revisiting the regional agreement and making the necessary changes or adjustments that we should be making, whether it be semantics or something like this, or the purpose of it as well too. So it's certainly something the Department of Education is wanting us to look at, and it certainly guide us with that as well too. And that will go hand in hand as we're developing our strategic plan for the district as well too. So we'll be talking about that a little later on, and we'll show you as well on the slide the letter that we received as part of the QR code that has that letter from the Department of Education.
So two other items we budget to help offset the assessments. Medicaid reimbursement. Medicaid reimbursement provides us with revenue for Medicaid-related services that we provide in the schools. So nursing in many cases, speech language pathology, occupational therapy, things like that we provide in the schools. It's a relatively small amount of money, but we do receive it. It's thanks to the work of all of those folks who kind of take care of that work and make sure they document it. They perform what's called random moment in time studies. I'm looking at Janelle because she knows it better than me. To document their work. A lot of that can be a little tedious, and we really appreciate that work because it does bring a little money into the district. Interest income fluctuates based on interest rates. Our interest income has been up a bit in past years, so we're happy for that. Who knows what it's going to do in the long term, so we try to kind of plan through what we think is a long-term assessment of what we might receive. And then finally, a lot of these items, if we don't spend the full budget, they end up flowing to E&D, which is another component. We're working on certifying our E&D this year, so you won't see that. We've actually put more school choice in place, with the understanding that once our E&D is certified, we could use it separate. So again, regional agreement is silent for these two items in particular, but we're just using it to offset the assessments. Of Tohoto, I'm sorry, we use it because Tohoto is split by the foundation enrollment among the towns. It just seems the place. When I look back at historical documents, that's where it has been used in the assessment. Minimum local contribution. This is an important part of the assessment calculation. The state requires that every town contribute a minimum amount to the education of their children. Some of this feeds into that whole net school spending calculation earlier. So the state determines a minimum spending level needed to provide adequate education to town. That's what they referred to before as sort of a foundation budget. The state considers what is the minimum amount of money that this municipality needs to run its district. And then each town, based on its property values and personal income, report to the Department of Revenue, is assessed a share of that in accordance with their ability to pay. There's a formula. I don't know the whole formula. I trust Nessie to come up with that, or the state to come up with that. I've dug into it in the past for certain components, but I would not pretend to be an expert in that. So regional agreement allocates that minimum local contribution, and this is important when we get into the discussion of the minimum local contribution is kind of the first thing each town pays. It's a fixed amount, but it's important in that changes in minimum local contribution lead to those changes in chapter 70. So, the minimum contribution, regardless of which school we put it in, comes right off the top. The town's paying that amount. But then when we allocate that chapter 70, regardless of where it is, it becomes important because those shifts in minimum local contribution get carried over into shifts in chapter 70. But this does use, Mike talked about these moving averages. MLC uses a 5-year moving average, so the most recent year plus the prior 4 years foundation enrollment. So when we get into the schools, we'll start talking about Berlin, Boylston individually, then Tohoto. So these are the major drivers to Berlin's budget. We've really been working to figure some of these out. You will notice employee health and retiree health are both at 18%. We got the retiree health number a little earlier this year. We get that in the end of November, and that is for our retirees. And that rate applies January 1st through December 30th. Our active employee rate applies July 1st to June 30th. And we've been kind of waiting for the final sort of shoe to drop on that. We just met with our representative, and that's right about 18% too. So those are big factors. Health insurance is a big cost to the district. A couple of the other items are items we've talked about, things like homeless transportation, electricity in the past, those are pretty normal. When we get into special education, transportation, and tuition and fees, we have used some offset on our district tuitions from circuit breaker to offset some of the tuition and fees costs. And special education transportation can sometimes be a bit of a moving target. And Janelle and I have been in pretty consistent conversation about this. We did have, you will see some shifts away from the elementary schools towards Toronto. And that is because of student moves. Students are moving up to Toronto. We kind of finalized the conversations about those moves. Those weren't in the very initial ones we had as we were putting the budget together. And there, of course, there are very small variances between other lines throughout the budget. These are just the major items that we're talking about, some of the costs. So we're talking about what are we going to cut and how are we going to save some money. That's important, again, to assessments. One of the things we've talked about in many meetings is this district employed, I want to say 12 plus contracted paraprofessionals district-wide. Those contracted paraprofessionals cost substantially more than regular employees. It varies. We have a number of different contract vendors, agencies we work for, and the hourly rates of those can be pretty substantial. So we're estimating that per paraprofessional that we hire directly would be about $35,000 in direct savings. That gets into, we are going to commit to that across the board in this budget. So we've committed, Alice committed, and Janelle's committed that we are going to make a full court press to hire direct paraprofessionals. One of the realities is, these agencies are somehow hiring people, right? So there are people out there who should be able to get candidates. So we're taking it as our job, our role as administration to figure this out and make it work.
And please understand, it might be a situation where a new student might come into our district or with some special needs or special things that they might need. There might be a situation where we might have to reach out to an agency as well too. But like Aaron said, in the conversations with Janelle, this is something we know we're going to move on. It costs us a lot of money, and we want to actually have our employees internal as well too. And we're looking at our whole process of hiring as well too. The minute we post a job posting, I'm getting emails within minutes from agencies saying, we have people that can fill your spot here, right, as well too. So it's our role in the central office as well too, and we've talked to Janelle and principals about a better process of being able to not only post these jobs, but also being right on it. So when people are applying for these jobs, that we're reaching out to them and getting them right in as well. So we're going to be working on that during the summer, tightening up that HR process as well.
To Al's point, we have some staff reductions / reallocations of workloads. We have, I've done a pretty in-depth analysis of our circuit breaker on what we have available. In doing so, I've freed up a little bit of money for us to use towards some of our tuitions. You'll see in the school, we've allocated a little bit more funding in that area to help support the budget and the assessments. Special education transportation, like I said, there are some students moving up to the Honda. You see some of that money. We also, you'll see in prior versions of the budget, we were working with Assabet Valley to figure out what the increase would be. We've confirmed that the increase, the annual increase in that cost will be a little lower than we anticipated. So we're building that into that number. That's what we've done. So when we get to Berlin Memorial Operating Assessment, oops, next slide. So we have the school budget, and then as I mentioned, right, we're putting the district office share right back in. This is that 25% district office share going right back in. You see Boylston will be exactly the same number. Then we get to a total Berlin Memorial School budget. We take out the Chapter 70 calculation. That's using that two-step formula. And then Chapter 70 using the DORE, BMRE, BRE formula. And we get into a total assessment for Berlin Memorials. Now, Boylston, very similar drivers. I won't bore you with all the details, but 18% health insurance is going to be a universal issue. Some of the transportation, we're seeing some small increase in what we expect for transportation. Special education transportation, same thing. Students moving up to the Honto. Special education tuitions. Again, there were some move-outs this year and move up to the Honto, as well as some offset for circuit breaker we're factoring into that. The circuit breaker amounts are in that detailed budget you have in the earlier slides. So I'm not dwelling on those, but you can see what that circuit breaker amount is. Yeah, I'm good. Boylston Elementary School, what are the cuts we've made and what are the savings? So again, we're eliminating those contracted paraprofessionals. Same thing, same story. Staff reductions, reallocations, same thing, same story. We're trying to save money there. In my earlier versions, I realized I had allocated some of that school choice money inequitably per se, so we put a little bit of additional school choice in Boylston to help offset that insurance cost. And then special education transportation, we have the same sort of savings for changing units. So then calculating the Boylston Elementary operating budget, we start with the school budget, which is in prior slides. We add in that district share, again, identical to Berlin, to get a total budget. we take out the share of chapter 70 using the same calculation, then we take out chapter 71 using the same calculation, and we get into a total for an Wilson Elementary School assessment. So we move into the Honda Regional Middle High School. And we have, again, drivers. One of the things you are going to notice is the salaries really go up. That is in part due to the moves. We've had some student moves up to Toronto that have impacted that have impacted the need for things like paraprofessionals. So when you have paraprofessionals who are say one-to-one or supporting students, the paraprofessional need moves with the students. So some of that is, and some of it is just other, normal increases. Employee health, retiree health, special education transportation is going up, right? So we said that some of that, the reductions in the elementaries led to an increase at the Honda. That's normal. We've applied a little bit more circuit breaker to help with those special education tuitions that have been a significant burden on the Honda's budget. And then we also have collaborative tuitions, which we've also offset. We're trying to offset those. So a lot of that's in there. You can see some of the notes I spoke to down below. In prior slides, we showed a pretty significant increase in substitutes. I would like to say that in speaking with Lisa, the principal of the Honda, she has made a commitment to keep that number down. That may involve some finagling and providing alternative coverage, things like that, and really looking at where those balances stand on a regular basis. She and I work together with quite actively to intersect investment issues. So similar to the paraprofessional commitment we've made a commitment to try to manage this. So where did we end up? Some of those contracted paraprofessionals, when we did all the movement, actually moved up. We're set to move up to Toronto. So some of the savings that we have is in those contracted paraprofessionals. We are reducing some staff, and we've used a little extra circuit breaker to help offset some of those costs. So we reported about $1,000 from sort of our last liquidations. So then Tohoto is not directly allocated to a single town like the elementary schools. Tohoto has a formula, and Tohonto's formula involves each member's local minimum contribution, and we calculate out the schools based on foundation enrollment. Then we take out 10% aid, transportation reimbursement, apply and some of the prior slides. Trying to remember because oh yes. So this is a 5-year moving average. I was trying to make sure I saw the language in there and I didn't forget it. So you will see the language states for the preceding 5 years and for a 5-year moving average. So for those of you excited to read the agreement, you can find that. So we get to the Tohoto school budget. The district's share, I think you will see this is exactly twice the share to each of the elementary schools for that 50%. The total budget, taking out their share of Chapter 70, calculated using the formula, Chapter 71 using the SETA formula, charter reimbursement. Looking back historically, charter reimbursement is something that has been allocated directly to the Honda. So it's a small amount, and it's typically proportional to the towns. It's hard to calculate exactly what you're getting that charter reimbursement for. It fluctuates a lot. So this gives the towns sort of a foundation-based share of that. So then we get down into the total molecular assessment. So then we get into the Berlin minimum local contribution, the Forest minimum local contribution. Then that gets us, once we take those out, we get the total above minimum contribution. That is then allocated in accordance with the foundation enrollment formula, that 5-year moving average of foundation. So then we get to like, what are the operating assessments for each town? So the BMF Berlin, the BMS operating assessment is 4,512,926. Sorry, let's see if that angle. The Toronto minimum local contribution, calling that out, is at 1.9 million, and then the above is another 1.9 million, coming to a total of 1,370,267. That represents a $570,992 increase at this time, which comes to about 7.32%. Again, I think in our conversations, we understand that this may not be exactly what the council to be, particularly when we add capital in, but this is where we are in this moment, and we are excited to have this conversation with tenants. Royston, same process. BES assessment, the Hunto minimum local contribution, the Hunto above minimum local contribution. Their total operating comes to $12,360,097. One of the realities in this budget is the number of Boylston had a couple other district students last year who have since moved up to Toronto. So those have since become sort of district shared responsibility. So when you look at that percent increase, it's a little lower, and that's a big driver for that reason, to that end result out of So now we get into debt and capital costs. We have more regional agreement conversation and more formulas. So capital costs, what exactly are they? There's a pretty long list of what's covered, but it's really all expenses in the nature of capital outlay. It is all tangible items that the district may need to improvements on the building, upgrades to the building, what have you. Sometimes equipment needs, legal equipment needs. You'll see some of that in here. The regional agreement, in this case, Mike alluded to this, uses two separate averages to calculate the capital assessment. So it uses what's called the town's running average percentage. And this is a 4-year moving average of an annual average percentage. That annual average percentage is an average of its Tonto enrollment percentage plus, and I'm going to say the regional agreement says district foundation enrollment percentage. We have taken that into years in the past as to expand it to Tonto. The most appropriate for it to be based on Tonto foundation enrollment. So this is another place where maybe we should look at the regional agreement for some clarity. So you average those two numbers for each year. And then with that average, you do a 4-year moving average to determine the ratio of capital costs apportioned to each town. Is that crystal clear to everyone? We all 100% estimator? Great. So really quickly, when we get into the debt assessment, there are 2 bonds on this building we're sitting in. One is a 2021 refinance of, I don't know when the bond is, I believe both of these bonds were initially actually out of 2010. 2018 is probably refinanced. Well, in that history. But both of them, I believe, with my notes, 2018 bond, is retired in 2030. Well, 2021 retires in 2031, and 2018 retires in 2033. So you've got about 6 years on the 2021 bond, and yeah, 8 years. Sorry, Matt. On the 2018 bond. So you've got a little while, but that's coming. It's looming to be off those bonds. So you get into principal interest. We shared the debt assessment worksheets with both towns, so they have that now. It's something interesting they didn't have before. They're kind of partners in this debt, so they should have had the debt schedule. I used the wrong term, it's debt schedule. But they have those now, so they can see these. And that's simply the payment from the debt. Now, again, this is apportioned in accordance. So Mike spoke to the variable nature to the towns. Even though this is a fixed rate bond, because you use a moving average that changes every single year, it's really a variable rate to towns, right? So the total dollars don't change, but how those dollars are mixed up between one town and the other can change. So that's an important thing to remember. Again, something to think about for the region. So getting into the actual capital. And this is where I think as we go through the final conclusion to the budget and what the final assessments are, this is where some sticker shock will set in. This is where some of these conversations can happen. You will notice some items are shaded. Every one of these items on our capital request is an item that we think needs to be addressed. There are some we feel more comfortable potentially pushing off if we have to. And those are the ones that are grayed out. Our priority items are the ones that remain at the top. Our final assessment that we're sharing tonight includes all of the capital items. We'd like to have those discussions with the towns. Before we have sticker shock and things like that, we just want to make sure that we understand this is a conversation. We'll be meeting with both towns on the 17th and 19th, and we can have those conversations. Absolutely, Berlin Elementary School, the elevator controls are going to be an ADA compliance issue. So I'm going to absolutely, push to those folks from Berlin who might be listening or here. That is a pretty significant priority for us. Again, these are town-owned buildings that need to be ADA compliant. We could have some real issues if those were
Before we were asked to prioritize those, that's why they're listed in the water. I know Aaron said, these are still things like owning a home that we know need to be done, right? And so we asked them to prioritize them, that's why we put them in that way and gray in the other areas. But whatever and those are conversations we have in global scrutiny of the towns. But whatever we don't see funded this year, and we understand it, the financial piece of it, you'll see next year, right? There are still things that we believe need to be done. And by the way, these are all in conversations with our principals, right? Who know the building better than anybody, who know what needs to take place. I know for Berlin, replacing the elevator control is a huge piece, and you'll see and hear from me multiple times that adding the cameras to the outsides of Berlin is extremely important for safety of not only when the kids are in school, but when school is out as well too. And you'll see that in all of our capital requests as well.
Again, to Al's point, the roof isn't going away. It's not going to magically get fixed by ignoring it. We're going to continue with this. We understand, the accounts have limited funds, and just like your home budget, you have so much money to deal with. Hopefully, the roof will last a little bit longer. We'll kick the can down the road on some of these things. So we did with Boylston. Boylston, I think as many people know, is in the midst of a major roof project. That is not on here because that's already underway and committed to. But we do have a water pump and some other repairs that need to happen. As Al shared, we need some camera updates at that elementary school. There are also a couple doors that need fog readers. So those are the access cards we use. There are apparently 2 doors, so we're kind of grouping that under the auspices of security. Those are things that are kind of priorities. And then you will see at all schools, we have some degree of student staff device replacement. There is no line item in the operating budget to cover this. It is traditionally gone through capital year after year. We have had some really good conversations with the towns, with the understanding that their operation capacity may be tapped out, but maybe at some point in the future, we could move these funds into operations where I think we all agree they belong more appropriately. So these are largely staff laptops and Chromebooks. They're relatively speaking to capital costs, low individual dollar costs, and we cycle through them every year, right? It's almost similar to textbooks and things like that. We have to repurchase these on a fairly regular basis, probably more often than textbooks. They have a lifespan of 5 years, give or take, and we try to cycle through them in an appropriate time.
And just for clarity on that Wilson roof project, that's an MSBA project we're working on. So we just want to make sure clarity on that. That's why you're not seeing it on capital. In terms of student and staff device replacement, Joe Spossato, our interim tech director, he is in the process of making a 5-year plan. And I know when we met with Wilson and Berlin, they both asked for that to take place in terms of technology. So we'll be ready to roll that out shortly. We can work with Joe and get that in place as well.
So when we get to the Honda, similar, you will see that middle school furniture is kind of a #1 priority there. Lisa really pressed that upon us. I had the opportunity to sit in some middle school chairs. I know there are some middle schoolers who are my size, and I think it's safe to say that I'm comfortable in those chairs. I don't know if this number is something that towns are amenable or able to fund in this year. But I think what we'd like to look at is what can we replace, right? Could we focus on 8th grade first, right? And could we find enough to serve those Aaron Osborne sized 8th graders, right? Because they're going to be struggling sitting in those tiny chairs. There's stools, there's desks, and there's chairs that are just not sized for, particularly some of our 8th graders who are, 6 feet above, right? That gets really challenging. The projector here is coming to end of life. One of the challenges with projectors is they're not really based in lasting X years. They last X hours. So it's hard to say, exactly where it's going to be, but it's been around for a while. It's been a lot of hours on it. It's original to the building. So we're looking at, a 13-year-old projector that has been used for a while. So we'd like to look at that in the controller. Student and staff device, because there are just more students here and more staff, we kind of split that out for 2 separate items. It's the same as for the elementary school, just student staff. Some of those other items, the building automation system, that's somewhat an efficiency item. It does help make your buildings more efficient, but we understand, that may not make it. You can look up at the lighting above. That's all kind of fluorescent lighting, so it's flickering. We'd like to look at replacing that with LED lighting. It's more consistent and renewable. A couple other items you can see related to this theater lighting, the actual stage lighting, theater lighting, and the sound system. Those amounts, I think it's fair to say, those were based on a 3-year plan that was not elected to move forward in the first year, so that rolls 2 years together. Those are going to continue to kick down the road. We use this auditorium quite a bit. We have a production next month, if I didn't mention it before, and we also do things like rent this theater out to community events. We provide it for various services. It's really important that we keep this theater really professional. So, we would love to engage in that conversation with the towns. We feel like we can kick it down the road right now, but again, at some point, that money's going to come due, right?
this building really is the heart of our two communities, right? And so any events that we take place in this community, we need a larger facility for it to take place here, right? From the National Junior Honor Society, all the events, we're bringing families in for the first time as well too. So it really is the heart of our school. We want to make sure that we're maintaining it, right? So we can continue to do that. So like we said earlier, you know, all these things are things we met with the principal, met with our facilities director. These are things that need, and we prioritize those in order. But you'll see these year for year until either we have to because it's an emergency that they're not working anymore. But we really feel like these are the things that we need to be looking at as a community to make sure we're keeping our schools current and in the best shape, right? Curbside appeal is so important for our families when they're coming into our buildings as well.
And I know, Joe, that final item in the phone system, Joe and I had a lot of conversations about this. We're picking that's the lowest priority, we're picking that down. We're fairly certain the towns aren't gonna be amenable to doing that, and we're looking at some options for that that may be lower costs. So expect to see that back maybe next year, but with a much lower cost. It may be a more distant one to be able to do. So again, you know, to avoid the obvious sticker shock that's going to come up, you know, that capital cost piece is a big component to this. And we really, again, relish those conversations with the towns in terms of what their capacity is to look at that. As we shared some of those items, if we picked them down the road, you know, the Berlin Memorial roof, right? I mean, at some point, you can only patch a roof so long, you can only kick a roof down the road so long before you're going to have significant issues. We're comfortable kicking it down the road this year. But, you know, again, that's something we really want to keep looking at seriously. So those are, you know, the intent of a lot of that is to make sure it's on the radar screen. So when we get down to, you know, that debt assessment, capital, the condo capital, those are some pretty big numbers for capital assessments. We understand that. We're not living in a magical world where we have unlimited. So when we get into the total assessments that we're talking about, again, I think, you know, in this moment, we want to really focus more on the operating side of things and really understand that we're going to really look at both the operating and the capital, but we know that capital number is going to be significantly different. So our total assessment number, we added all of that capital, comes to $10,585,313. Again, we know, and I'm just going to keep saying this, that a $2,143,118 increase is not capital. We understand that. So I think the more we put that in the record, the better it is for everybody involved, if we have that understanding. So then we get into the bonus assessments. Same thing, we have again, solid increase to operating assessments based on last year. But the debt and capital is really, and particularly the capital items, are particularly where most of that money is. We look forward to those conversations. We are looking at total assessment of $14,206,353, an increase of $1,160,367. And that comes to the end of this general presentation.
So before we go in for just a couple of things, Aaron and I might be presenting for the first time to Berlin-Boylston Regional School District, but not our first time doing a budget presentation. We usually don't have a 41 or 40 slide presentation, but after speaking with Mike, our chair and school committee, we knew it was extremely important to really lay down and really have people have a good understanding of what it looks like and what these figures mean and what capital means and school choice money means, what our regional agreement looks like, and how it is gets a little complicated in certain sections, and make sure people have a clear understanding about that as well too. So we really felt like we wanted to give this information. We put it in spots that people can see it and can go back and refer to as well too. The other piece, I just really need to make sure that is clear, is with everything going on with this budget here, please appreciate that we're in contract negotiations right now with our teachers, right? And so that's a piece of the budget that's still uncertain for all of us, right, as we're going through that. School committee and the towns, we will keep you updated and informed about that, but that's a huge piece of this budget at this time of year that we need to make sure that people understand that that's an unknown figure that still we're working out. And I'm sure you're paying attention to what's taking place across the state of Massachusetts and the figures that are out there. So we're being mindful of that and trying to do the best we can and presenting a budget to you at this time.
All right. We're gonna do our public comment section. That's on the agenda, yeah? So who's running this? Joe?
Anyone sign?
You're in charge now.
Anyone else before I bring this up to the chair that would like to sign up for public comment?
All right. First, April, I'm not saying the last name. April Stewart, all right, and Boylston, I assume.
You want to come out to the mic?
So come on the mic and let us know what you think.
First, I thought it was a sign-in sheet, so I didn't really have a comment. I did send you a link for an ADA grant that might help you out with the BMS elevator. I know that's one of the things that they do is elevators, so that might help with some of the.
April, I'm so sorry. Just for the record, so could you just your name and
April Stewart, Town Administrator.
thank you. Appreciate it. Sorry.
No problem. I will get back my time.
All right, let's go.
Thank you.
Bill Pilsinger, Boylston as well?
Yeah,
Same deal?
I thought it was the same.
Okay, all right, no problem. Thank you very much for signing in. You know you will not be able to say you didn't know about this. Good deal.
Just
Next,
to clarify, Board of Selectmen.
Big.
all right. Next on the list is a Mary Porter from Berlin. Come on down, Mary. Mary, you didn't think it was just a sign and you don't want to say anything, do you?
Mary Porter, Berlin Finance Committee. Yes, it looked like a sign-in sheet, and I thought I was signing in, but I'll talk. I'm up here, right? I walked the whole way down. So I want to thank you, Aaron Osborne, for the clarity, transparency, all the work you've been doing. I know how hard it's been because I've been involved for the last few years. So I want to start with that. I do have a question directed to you, Aaron, on slide 11, the revenues. So slide 11 totals up about 2.3 million in revenues.
I'll give you some time back, Mary, but just to be clear, it's not a Q&A. You can pose a question, we'll discuss it during our discussion.
Sure.
It's not a back and forth, it's just one.
Sure.
Sure.
All right. All right.
Happy to talk about that.
Yeah, I won't harass you with follow-ups, but just if you could walk through your philosophy, either what this district has done or what you're applying and what you do with those revenues. And I ask that question because as I look at applied circuit breaker and school choice revenues, I don't understand how among the three schools they were, what was the thought process to apply them? And then what's the philosophy? Food reserve and right, those sorts of things. So that's my question. Is it okay? Do I need to stay here and keep talking or should I sit down?
You may, the only thing I'm gonna say if I can, is you may have missed the beginning where you did talk a little bit about that, but we can talk offline about that.
Okay.
In the first part of the presentation, it's there as well.
Okay.
Let's talk offline.
All right, thanks.
Are you sure? Good? You got a minute?
I have a minute left, oh geez, I don't know. That was the main. Anybody want to talk about net school spending? We're really high across the Commonwealth in terms of our net school spending. So we're really funding our education at a comparatively very high level. Comment.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
Any last minute comments, anyone? Even if you didn't sign up?
So I did not sign up.
Come on up.
So Howard Grosvenor, Boylston, FinCom Chair. So I like to reiterate what Mary just said. The communication compared to last year. Aaron, thank you very much. This is a much more detailed. We've been asking for this type of breakdown in the past. It's clear. The two towns are quite a bit different in their financial situations. As you're well aware, we've expressed that to you guys last year, and the same situation. Berlin, I don't know if they've done any better, but that's not my call. Again, on the elementary school side, we'll work with you on the capital items, continue what we started last year, and to try to address the issues this year. So I will leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so that concludes public comment on the budget hearing. And so now we will discuss in the school committee, take votes. I think, what's the plan? I want to make a motion to get the budget out there and then we can discuss and vote.
Yep. I'm going to ask our secretary.
And what do we have here? This, the motion is based on what we have here?
Sure. So what you're going to be reading here is the motion that includes capital as well too. So the overall motion for the both towns. I think if she reads it, it's pretty self-explanatory. And then we'll open it for conversation amongst school committee.
That the Berlin Boylston School. I'm sorry. I move that the Berlin Boylston School Committee vote to approve a fiscal year 26 operating budget of $24,393,973 and a fiscal year 26 capital budget of $4,059,702,000, resulting in a total assessment of $10,585,313 to the town of Berlin and $14,206,353 to the town of Boylston.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Megan, all right. What do you got? Anybody?
Thank you, Aaron. and Val and everyone on the subcommittee as well.
Anybody? Yuli?
I know we gave you a lot, and just we're being mindful of the 45 days that we have to present budgets to both towns of Boylston and Berlin to make sure that we're ready for that date for when they have their town meetings as well too.
All right, anybody, any questions?
So that capital includes everything, including the grade out.
Yes, it does. So again, those are, I think it would be very beneficial to have those conversations on the 17th and 19th with towns. And, as we revisit the budget down the road, do so in a way that doesn't get us to the floor of town meeting to make some of these decisions. We try to.
And just for clarity, right, so one of the things that we've talked about when we spent hours with school committee members and budget, the budget that you vote tonight can always go down, it can't go up, right? So if there's changes and conversations that we're having, that FinComs in both Berlin and Boylston with the capital, we can come back and visit the school committee and bring that down as well too. But we're looking for at least a budget, a number to restart the conversation and start those individual conversations with our communities as well.
I'm gonna address Mary.
Yeah, Aaron did, right? Mary's question, Mary,
Finished that.
slide 11, Mary's question is already.
Slide 11 in terms of talking about
Philosophy of
philosophy. So sure. So there's a couple items there. Your school choice account represents your kind of rainy day fund. I think for a couple different reasons. We acknowledge there's at least sprinkling a little bit outside at least, and there's some challenges we're facing as we move forward. Additionally, we don't have EMD certified. I'm pretty confident we will have money available in EMD once that is certified, so we could arguably replace some of that choice with EMD after the fact. Or we could just not spend EMD and carry it all over to next year and use more next year. So those represent, some accounts that are available basically to the school committee to spend. I'm trying not to wildly overspend school choice. So we will take in probably between $435,000 and $450,000 in school choice this year. I would consider, school choice like a personal savings account, right? You can spend it when you need it, but you need to know that at some point, if you continue to overspend it, you're going to run out. So we need to have those conversations. Circuit breaker is based on figures received last year, a lot of conversations with Janelle, talking about what things look like this year. Our conversations have indicated that our numbers in terms of out-of-district placements, which are the biggest drivers to our circuit breaker number, are going to remain pretty consistent. I don't see a huge spike in them, but I also don't see a big drop in them. So we're carrying over partially a similar number from last year in terms of what was available. If you look at the circuit breaker files, I don't know, Mary, if you've gone out and done that. Last year, there were some impacts to that, so you'll notice a big negative number in that file. That was an emergency relief amount that was really a loan from DESI. It wasn't real circuit breaker. We meant to pay back in the next year. So that's a factor, but I anticipate we will receive about $950,000 in circuit breaker for fiscal 26, give or take. Built into that larger number I have is a carryover. So circuit breaker is available before it falls into E&D of its own accord. It is available for use for 2 years. So we did not use a lot of the fiscal 24 circuit breaker we received. I am holding some of it to use in fiscal 25 to help with the budget for 25, and I'm carrying a little bit over to fiscal 26 to help support that. I think that's a reasonable approach to take, given our numbers and trends, and we can go from there. If we, again, don't fully spend that, some will then roll over to the following year, and we can then use that.
And so Beth, that should, just because we're going to keep it at school committee level, that should answer the question that you asked about, making sure we answered Mary's question, okay?
I'm curious, the IDEA is the federal grant. Do we feel that's threatened? I know.
That is a many billion dollar question.
Yeah, we haven't had any direction one way or another. We'll leave it at that at this point.
If that goes away, there will be a lot of districts having some very big conversations about the real challenges. That is an item. So the governor's budget items came out, the state budget items came out at the end of January. Those may change also. So one of the items we may look at is if there's change, we could amend our budget based on changes in the budget items. That would be a monumental change, and
In particular, large communities as well too, and inner cities as well. But we
sorry.
have not had any guidance, so we don't even want to go there yet in terms of that conversation.
That allocation does not usually come out until July either. It's been very consistent year to year, so I never had an issue. I had a big issue with Title I in the last district, where the July 1 numbers came out a lot lower than we anticipated. But I've never seen any really fluctuate significantly. So I'm pretty confident that assuming it exists, and it may be that it exists in the form of more of a block grant or something like that. I think it would be really hard to eliminate that, and that would just have to be a hurdle we face when it comes to that.
I guess I'm just wondering if we did add more from school choice, would it significantly impact the individual residents of the towns?
Every dollar we put in impacts. I think that number of 850 is what I feel comfortable saying that, we can use within our means. So like I said, it's your savings account, right? If at some point, if you spend through your savings, it doesn't exist anymore, right? But there are times when you need to dip into your savings and make some moves. I don't think it's inappropriate. I would kind of, want to have those conversations with school committee about what if they could create some scenarios if the school committee wished, as part of those conversations. Part of future meetings could even be almost a working group meeting. I could, apply different things. One of the things I do is I spend a lot of time doing this is I build a spreadsheet that allows me to make changes, and those will be reflected in the assessment when we instantly make those changes. So if we're sitting down, it's not conducive to this sort of environment, but we're sitting down with a small group and a working group trying to figure out where those numbers might be, we can run some scenarios.
The hard part for us as being a regional school district, right, not unlike a municipality, like, we can't go back, right, to the towns and say, something has occurred and we need to come back to the towns, right? In case, so that's why it's that, to have that rainy day fund, for lack of any other better wording, it's important for us to have, but we just don't know, right? And I don't even want to go there back to COVID, but we just didn't know at that time, right? And there's things we don't know, and we need to certainly make sure we have some savings put aside for us as well. And that's, we feel, Aaron and I, in conversations we had even with school committee, and Mike, is that's a number we feel comfortable.
Yeah, I kind of want to say something about the just offsets in general. Looking at the BMS assessment, the operating assessment, 4.5 million, 12,000. So, not to rehash last year, but on June 17th at our meeting, we did, in addition to all the offsets and school choice money that we had already applied, we applied another 250,000 roughly. So we went into the June 17th meeting with a BMS assessment of, now don't quote me on these numbers, I'm talking off the top of my head. I believe it was 4.5 million, 8,000. That then got reduced along with the Tohoto assessment to something like 4.2, 4.28-ish, around there, by using that extra cash. So that's extra cash that went towards that last year. We could possibly talk about doing a little more now, so we're having a plan to phase it out, like Scott mentioned. But if you look at the BMS assessment, 4.512, compared to last year's 4.508, it would bring our percentage change from 7 to like 3.9% or something. So it was money spent last year, but comparing last year, the 7.8 total to the 8.3 total for operating, 7% increase isn't really what we intended. It would be more like 4% roughly if we hadn't applied that extra cash last year. So that extra cash that we applied last year isn't available to apply this year. So you almost have to look at a 2-year increase that's really the true cost versus using up, spending down all of our cash. So we got to have that out there, just not to rehash old feelings, but that is what happened. That's what the very first slide, or slide 3, mentions, having rewrote the budget. That's what drove that. So to go from 4.508 to 4.512, we'll have the capital conversation. But it's not as shocking as the sticker shock shows.
And to the point we don't want to go back and talk about last year, but we want to make sure that we're ready. So when we go to town meeting, right, and for that vote, we'll make sure we're prepared and ready. And that's why we're putting this budget out here now, looking for school committee to vote one way or another, and then us to engage in those conversations so that everyone's prepared and ready for when we go to our town meeting in May. And that everyone has a number. We're not doing it at last second for you guys. We made that promise to school committee that we would not engage in that, and we'll make sure that it's ready for that.
And I just want to point out, those numbers include for BMS cutting 2 FTEs, for BES cutting 2 FTEs, and Tohoto 3 FTEs, which is not thrilling.
That is, and please know, those were precise cuts, right? We're being very careful, and we're not even in terms of cutting, but reallocating, right? So those services might be provided in other ways to our children. Again, we took that really into account, right? And so we didn't want to make these grand cuts but they were difficult decisions that we had to make, but we feel it's gonna have the least amount of impact on our children and redistributing to work on all of us here. The people that are sitting in our director's positions and people that are sitting in our principal's roles and some other positions in our school.
Right.
I thought you were looking at me.
Oh, I like it.
If I can just
Yes.
say, it's hard to downplay, to not recognize the percent of these to retire health insurance. I mean, we have millions of dollars in health insurance costs for both employees and retirees. So when we're talking about increases, and I understand towns have had significant increases as well. I've talked to other school business officers throughout the state. Everybody's wrangling with it. When you're looking at increases of that magnitude on something that's that big, it's almost impossible to have reasonable percentages in this whole thing without making cuts or applying more circuit breaker choice and things like that.
And the other part is we also had to renegotiate our busing contract as well too, so that was an added expense. That is difficult as well. And again, I can't stress enough, we're in the middle of contract negotiations as well, so making sure that we do that fair and equitable as well.
Last chance. All right, budget, we have to do a roll call, yeah?
Yes.
All right, so, Lori, I have you vote.
Aye.
Megan,
Aye.
Beth,
Aye.
Lisa,
Aye.
Jess.
Aye.
All right, I'm an aye vote, the motion passes.
We thank you. We really do. School committee, our work is now moving forward, working with not only the school committee, but our towns as well too, and make those next steps and those next conversations. We'll absolutely be coming back to school committee. This is an ongoing conversation. Just know because we put a budget in front and it was passed today, we will continue these conversations over these next 45 days or so. Thank you.
All right, next up, we're gonna move into executive session and will not return to open session. Executive session pursuant to Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 38, Section 21A, Purpose 3, to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining, BDA, CBA, if an open meeting may have a effect in bargaining position of the public body, the chair so declares. May I have that motion, please?
So moved.
All right,
Second.
Lori, Lori.
Aye.
Megan.
Aye.
Beth.
Aye.
Lisa.
Aye.
Yes.
Aye.
All right,
And we're going to be in a multi-purpose room for that executive session.
all right, so we
Okay.
are now out of general session. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.